the Supreme Court, if you like the Supreme Court being able to have the power to describe everything as being either constitutional or unconstitutional, then you're not ruled by a democracy, you're ruled by an oligarchy. You've got 8 people in robes that are going to tell you whether or not laws are good or bad. And that's not the founding of this country. It's not how it was intended to work. And that all started back in Marbury v. Madison with Thomas Jefferson and these writs of mandamus, that where the Supreme Court, long story short, essentially granted itself the power to conduct judicial review under the old system, or the system that was ratified and that the founders approved was, if a law was deemed unconstitutional, it would go before the Supreme Court, and they would rule in favor of the person. But it was never on the Supreme Court to say constitutional, unconstitutional. You would get arrested for some law, you'd go, and it would get appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court would say, we're not punishing this person. This is against the Constitution. But the government would have to keep arresting people. It would have to keep going in front of the federal government. So what I'm saying is, and I'm sorry to go off on this, we can go back to tech, but all I'm saying is the core of the American experiment in individual rights, and what makes this country so great, and why I was willing to die for it after my initial enlistment, and why I have such love for this, is because it was the only experiment where the value of the individual was held at the top of the hierarchy, and that people could truly be allowed to flourish. And in 250 years, we did more than any society could have hoped to have achieved in tens of thousands of years. Or not that it's been around that long, but in thousands of years. Everything tends towards disorder, and everything, power always gets centralized. And we had a framework to do that, but we were willing participants in our own demise. And now we're scratching our heads and wondering why there's no individual, and why there's no individual autonomy, and why a guy can't smoke weed on the weekend, or why a guy can't do X, Y, or Z, because we have centralized the authority and the power and the decision-making structure, and we're allowing them to be. There would be no problem with money in politics if the federal government had only the powers that were outlined to it in the Constitution. AI is very good conscious projection, but it will never have consciousness or knowing, because it has no system of values. And if we were to instill values in it, it would still be consciousness projection. AI is consciousness projection. It's projected consciousness. It's getting very good, but on a calculator, you could get the same thing out of a that you get out of a neural network if you had sufficient time. That doesn't mean consciousness or knowing or AGI is present. And to me, it's just really fancy, clever math. And having trained these networks from dozens of years, or a dozen years now, and working with them, they're just really clever consciousness projection.